So as we close, we have an amazing panel. And so for the panel, what we're discussing, it will touch on some of the things that we've started already. Some of the conversations from morning all the way up to now have touched on this issue. And what we're looking at is basically the power dynamics, the power dynamics of platform design. And if that sounds like a jargon, we're about to unpack that a bit. So we'll have a panel and we'll take first 30 minutes of discussion. And then after, we'll open up the floor and raise questions, let's have a discussion, and then we call it a day, all right? So I'm gonna invite my guests, Ravi and Ariza, to the table, to the couch. Any sitting? A round of applause, guys, come on. Yes. Awesome. And I can sit here. Great. So I think just to open up, so that to frame this discussion, a lot of the conversations that started earlier touched on different types of technologies that have been used. Some people have used them in peace building to do like mediation. Other people have used them to do social media monitoring. There was actually one session where we just completed where we actually tested a platform on social media monitoring, which our members were actually part of that session. And behind these conversations of these tools that we take off the shelf, or sometimes we build ourselves, the question is, who designs them and what do they have in mind as they're designing them, right? And so people say social media platforms like Facebook are sometimes used for peace building, right? But what they meant for peace building was that the design they were meant for, right? When somebody was designing TikTok, is that the first thing they thought about? How did they structure the platform? And when we use those platforms to engage and say we are using TikTok to promote a peaceful narrative in our community because we think we can reach the youth through that platform itself, the question is, are we considering still the design under which it was designed for? So does it serve the purpose? Can it be better? Can it align with the goals and needs? Or are we competing? Are we trying to fix a square in a circle, right? So I'm just going to let my panelists introduce themselves so that I don't miss anything. Feel free to talk about the things that you love, things they're passionate about, and then we can continue. All right, start with you.
Hi everyone, good day or magandang araw in Filipino. Respond, please. Let's wake it up a bit, come on. So let me teach you a bit. Okay, so good day is magandang araw. Magandang araw. Good day. Okay, great. So we had a session with like some third graders yesterday, so it's still in my system. But anyway, hi, I'm Ariza, and I work in peace building and education, and I work primarily with young people here in the Philippines. I run a nonprofit organization called Cristiano Islam Peace Library, or CRIS. So we're an NGO that focuses on promoting peace and development in the Philippines through education and youth leadership. So we do provide education support, especially to youth in conflict-affected areas, through libraries, scholarship programs, and the like. More importantly, we do capacity building to train young people to become peace builders, and we also provide them with seed grants so that they can then take that training and then turn those ideas into reality. And we've done this for about 1,000 young leaders in the Philippines. And we also create information campaigns to spread positive values around peace. On more of a global perspective, I work with the Kofi Annan Foundation on the Extremely Together movement. So this Extremely Together is an alliance of 10 young leaders from all over the world working to promote peace on a more global context. And it's actually an idea pioneered by the former and late Secretary General Kofi Annan, who wanted to pass the baton to young leaders, the new generation in promoting peace. And I remember very clearly in a meeting with him that I had the privilege to attend before he passed away, where he said that he felt that his generation of leadership has failed. So it was that big of a challenge. The other hat that I'm bringing today is that I founded a marketing agency, a marketing consulting agency here in the Philippines. And since 2020, we've been working on campaigns involving PR and traditional media, digital media, events, and other communication strategies to help broadcast and share ideas and solutions around different issues. So we do work with corporate brands, but a lot of our work has also been with government institutions and non-government institutions on topics like climate, health, children's rights, education, tourism, farming, and more. And I think that those two experiences are what I'll bring to the table today. And also because I'm a Filipino and we're recognized as the patient zero in the global war on disinformation, I think it would be great to speak out on the impact of disinformation, fake news, hate speech, and all of these things from a more local perspective. Thanks.
Ravi.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Ravi Iyer. I work at the University of Southern California Marshall School's Neely Center. I've been there about 2 years. Before that, I actually worked at Meta or Facebook for about 5 years. And I worked on a lot of the things that we've talked about here, misinformation, hate speech, bullying and harassment. I used to work, I was a data science manager there. And a lot of what you do in data science is you kind of build these dashboards and you count how many times people viewed content that was later taken down for hate speech or content that was rated as false by a fact checker. And oftentimes you could drive these numbers to pretty low numbers, but I often felt like we weren't really solving the problem because a lot of times the things that people in society were saying were harmful were not captured by our metrics. They were things like a crime committed by an immigrant in a community. And crimes are committed by people of all groups. So you don't have to lie to people to mislead them that all immigrants are dangerous. You can just highlight a crime committed by someone of any group and make you afraid of someone. By platform definitions, that is also not hate speech, in part because you can't tell people what they can and can't be afraid of without getting to really serious issues about censorship. So a lot of what I did at Meta that was actually more successful were what you call break the glass measures. They're the things that have been done in crises around the world, done dozens of times at least. And so I often talk about design changes. Really what break the glass measures are just how do we design a system that, where people who are telling the truth, they get more distribution than people who are lying, or people who are less sensational, get more distribution than people who are more sensational. How do we align these systems with our better angels to our aspirations as opposed to our more of base desires, right? So, I've been doing that for a couple of years now, talking about design as a powerful way to address these issues of misinformation and hate speech. I don't really think platforms should be deciding what is hate speech or what is not hate speech. I don't think they should be deciding what is true or false. I don't think anybody in this room thinks that governments should be deciding those things either. And so rather than saying that the problem is users and the things that they're saying and how do we address those things, I think actually the problem is more the design of these platforms that are sort of encouraging us to say things that maybe are more sensational or more misleading than we want them to be, or they're allowing small groups of people to manipulate large groups of people. Most people are fine people. It's always a small group of people in any society that are trying to do bad things. And so how is the platform design sort of encouraging those things to happen? That's what I'll hopefully leave you with today, that maybe there's another frame than the sort of the moderation frame for addressing these issues.
Thanks so much, Ravi. And you started touching on, the meat of the conversation. But before we even get to that, I want to circle back to you, Ariza, as somebody who has set up a company that works with technologies, and you've seen all this the harms of mis and disinformation. If you think about, for instance, the US, for example, sometimes you'll see a tech company will be summoned by the government because there are some issues about the users, right? Either there's a conversation about there's a lot of mis and disinformation, and they'll show up, right? And they'll show up and they'll explain, maybe I think it's to the government why this is happening and whether they're responsible or not. So in your own words or in your own experience, what do you think that experience looks like in the global South? Because there are so many conversations about, should we compare? But I just want to hear from you. How does it look like when you've tried to either engage with tech companies or where you've seen users try to interface with tech companies, either to hold them accountable or to even ask questions?
To hold them accountable. So it's a very difficult challenge, I think. So the Philippines is quite unique in that we do consume a lot of social media. I think we're the top consumers of online videos worldwide, and this is 2023 data or 2024, it's the latest. We are the top consumers of vlogs and videos from influencers, and an average Filipino spends, I think, nearly 9 hours online per day, and I think that makes us third highest behind Brazil and another country. So what's interesting is that we're actually such a strong social media hotspot, but you'd find that the structure of companies that govern this social media space in the Philippines, they're not here. The leadership is not here. They're in Singapore, they're in Australia, or they're in their mother companies in the US or in Europe. So that in itself is already a gap in accountability because they do not see the context here firsthand, and they don't feel the impact of whatever this disinformation or the engines of these social media platforms create. So if you think about it, for instance, if there's a civil war in the Philippines because of hate speech circulated online, it's not going to bankrupt Mark Zuckerberg. It's not going to affect him much, I think. We might just be maybe a significant, but just a blip still in the revenue that Meta amasses. So there, an asymmetry of power that is not different from what we were talking about colonization. That we used to be a colony of Spain for 300 years and then a colony of the US for about 50 years. And I think in the paradigm of geopolitics, we're still under the blessing of the United States. And I feel that it is still an exploitative relationship, that we are being exploited in a way by certain systems, like these social media systems that, of course, are designed to earn money, most of all, and that we cannot affect change at the level of those who are exploiting us. So that's one aspect. Another I would say is, yes, locally, theoretically, our leaders can hold companies like Meta, TikTok accountable. But the question is, will they? Is it in their interest? I would say maybe not. I mean, in the Philippines, it's the political leaders who actually maybe benefit the most from this information. I mean, we've seen this in already the past two major elections when President Rodrigo Duterte got elected, and then President Bongbong Marcos, the son of a world-famous and record-breaking dictator, Guinness World record-breaking dictator, got elected. And obviously, their victories came because of a flood of disinformation on many platforms. So is it in their interest to regulate and hold accountable the same systems that put them in power? I would say maybe not. And then I guess after that, you would ask, then why are we electing these people in the first place? So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation because the social media helps elect these people in power, but at the same time, we need to change the people in power to influence social media. So I think we can talk about that more later. And maybe the final point I want to bring up now is what is the mindset or the philosophy that pushes these social media companies to get as big as they are, big tech, so to speak? It's capitalism, right? It's a mindset that you have to grow at all costs. And it's not even just affecting us in terms of social media and the way our minds operate now, it's also affecting the environment. So I think we should be questioning that engine of capitalism. We should be questioning whether companies should still be growing at all costs. I run a company, so obviously I am still for profitability, I am still for growth, but it has to be checked. It has to be conscious of what's going on around us. Otherwise, I mean, this world that we're operating in will no longer be profitable for anyone if things stay as they are.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think just to if you think about, so Ravi, over to you, if you think about the challenges that have been posed and raised, and also when we talk about accountability, a lot of the times it's usually after the fact, right? Something happens, something breaks, and then somebody's, tech company lead owner is summoned to respond, and in this case, they don't even show up, or even government aid is in bed with them. So I know you've been thinking of alternative ways to sort of address, because that is a systemic problem, structural problem. And can you share about what you've been thinking about? And you started to talk about it, but you'd like to hear more of how those approaches can work.
Well, I'd just be curious in the room if, if a social media platform were going to spend $1 billion to make something better, there's one way that they could spend that money when they could hire a bunch of more moderators and they could really, start checking information better. So you could spend $1 billion to review more content, or you could spend $1 billion trying to, change the design of your systems. And I guess, I think I agree with almost everything you said as far as like the identification of the problem. But I think a lot of what I've noticed is that, a lot of the conversation goes towards like, we need more moderation. We need to like, and I think the accountability, how do we fix it? I think needs to go more in the, how are these platforms designed? So I'm less familiar with the Filipino context, so I'll just sort of speak from the context I'm more familiar with. A lot of the things that people talk about in the United States are not necessarily misinformation, and they're not necessarily hate speech. They're really a lot of what they call fear speech. There's a professor at Rutgers who's done a lot of like work looking for hate speech online. A lot of what he finds is what he calls fear speech, which really takes the form of taking, some event that occurred, some terrible thing that someone of some group did, and sort of magnifying it to make it seem like everyone of that group is always doing that thing. And so, you can't tell people what they can and can't be afraid of. Our 11 o'clock news tells us, and this isn't new too, right? The fact that fear sells is not something new. But if you're going to address it, you're not going to get to it, I think, with this misinformation frame. And I actually think it's somewhat dangerous, at least in the U.S. context. There's been a lot of backlash to mistakes that platforms honestly have made with regards to misinformation. I think people should be able to question the efficacy of a vaccine. They, have reasonable questions about it. They could have people should be able to question elections around the world, right? Because not every election around the world goes smoothly. The problem is not the things that people say. The problem is the structure where a small group of people who hold these beliefs tend to dominate the conversation. And then there's another small group of people who like make a lot of money by like catering to that other small group of people. And so it's like the profit motive and the design of the system, which, people should be able to say what they want. But why do these small groups of people dominate? Why do like the troll farms? Why does that work at all, right? Like that doesn't work. It wouldn't work in this room if we had like a small group of people who tried to like dominate the conversation. We have norms and systems to deal with that. Why don't our online spaces also have, the equivalent of, we take turns speaking, right? Online, if you ever look at some of the stats, it's not a democratic system. It's supposedly it's democratic medium for speech. It's a small group of people who get all the distribution online, and there's if you said something on Twitter or Facebook, you would get nowhere near the distribution of the politicians that you follow. So, how do we make it a little bit more democratic so that it actually reflects the values of all of us as opposed to the values of a small group of people who often have an interest in dividing us all. And I think that's how we hold people accountable. So that'd be the question I'd have is like I think I 100% agree with you. I guess I'd be curious when you say, you want to hold people accountable, what would you actually, like, what do you want? What do you want to have happen, I guess? For you or the people in the audience, we have some ideas that we put forward, but I'd just be curious, like, what do people want to do to actually hold these platforms accountable?
Okay. Yeah. Honestly, working in education, working with young people, I would say we go with the education system. I'm a bit maybe not hopeless, but pessimistic on the kind of change that will be done by these tech companies, because currently they're not incentivized to do so. And in our context, for instance, maybe government and leaders are also not incentivized to do so. But I will hope that there is change in the education system so that it elevates people consciousness to be readily apprehensive and more critically process information wherever they get it from. I was in a public school yesterday, an elementary school in quite a poor area of Metro Manila, and I was honestly shocked. We had a peace playground. It was a nice little playground with games, and then here and there, they learn about facts around peace because it's National Children's Month in the Philippines. And I was shocked because there were kids from 3rd grade to 6th grade whom, when I asked them, what do you think peace means? They said they didn't know. And I even translated it in Filipino, kapayapaan. What is kapayapaan for you? And they said, we don't know. We've not heard this before. Or maybe they've heard it before, but they just don't remember. And I think it comes as a shock to me personally, because I think at that age there should be some sort of perception already, or you've heard peace somewhere, maybe in a song or maybe in a lecture, but it points towards the crisis right now that we have in the education system in the Philippines. That, well, statistics point that 9 out of 10 young Filipinos of age of 3rd grade, 10 years old, can't read properly. And I think the impact of that comes also from the pandemic, where the Philippines had the longest shutdown of schools, 2 years. And during that time, there were online classes, but of course, not all kids can access online classes. So we are starting from a very, very fragile space in terms of education, but we still need to work on it to have like a improved quality and improved access. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, how do we reinvent the education for this time and this age? And my personal answers to that, based on my work and even based on my work around marketing, is around critical thinking. That there is not enough work being done to infuse critical thinking into our education systems. And it's not just here in the Philippines, it's also in other countries. The way in which we conduct classes within 4 walls, that already is some sort of, I wouldn't say a red flag, but it's not sufficient just by itself, because the world doesn't exist within 4 walls. And the fact that you have somebody teaching you and you accept them, I also think that's not a great ingredient for critical thinking, because at a certain age, you should be incentivized to ask questions, difficult questions. You should be incentivized to correct people who you think are wrong. You should be incentivized to go outside official texts, official doctrines, and explore what else is there around you. So I think all of those are ingredients of critical thinking. And I think I'm being a little bit romantic here, but I didn't grow up with a classical background, so I never studied philosophy. I actually have a background in engineering. But when I did learn philosophy, start reading books about it, I thought of it as such a good solution, or at least part of a solution, to encourage critical thinking, to have learning systems that really encourage us to try to look for the truth, maybe acknowledge that at the end there is no one truth, and also to keep asking questions and to keep steering ourselves in the right direction, looking for that truth. And maybe the parallel of that in the scientific method, if I'm talking from my science perspective, is a scientific method, wherein even if you have a theory or an accepted fact in place, you still are sort of questioning it to arrive at the big truth. Yeah, I'll stop there for now.
So Ravi, I just wanted to pick up on that, because Ariza talks about some of the ways education can help some of the already vulnerable groups that are being targeted on social media platforms to be able to sort of protect themselves. So that's one. There's like there's a group out there that unless they go through like this process, they're just sitting down, right? And then there is the system, the governance system in a place like Philippines, where if the concern about, or rather the apprehension about using a method is based on the fact that the governance system or the systems that are in place are not willing, because there's no incentive both from the tech side and from the governance, how do you see some of these solutions that you propose work in these spaces? Is it, have you thought about that in a different context outside the US, where we've seen tech companies are more responsive? How do you envision it working in a space that is completely different?
Yeah, so I mean, first, I definitely think that education is important, obviously, but I think we all are products of our environment as much as, we often believe the things we want to believe. We believe the things that our friends believe. We're often more emotional and social than we are rational. And the smartest people around us often will use their intellect not to question new things, they'll use their critical thinking to figure out how to believe the thing they want to believe even more. And so I think it somewhat lets tech companies off the hook a bit if we put the onus on society to educate people better, and we don't think about the situation that tech companies create with the platforms themselves. In a world where I make more money by lying to people than I do by telling the truth, I'm going to feel, I'm going to like use my intellect to figure out how to lie to people, right? So yeah, I think we just need a better system rather than putting the onus on people. And one thing I often will talk about is how in the United States, 70% of kids feel like they're being manipulated by the devices. If I were to ask people here, how many of you are trying to spend less time on your phones? Just curious, how many people? So yeah, I mean, like I asked this question of like kids too, and they all want to spend less time on their phones. They know this is kind of ridiculous. Like they're spending all this time on their phones. They don't think this is healthy. None of us think this is healthy. Yet we carry around these devices which have like powerful AI systems that are trying to get us to use them more. And so you can sort of not even worry about like, hate speech, misinformation. We're just on our phones instead of talking to each other, developing like better social skills all the time. And so I just think that like there are better ways to design these products, and it's not unobvious to people in the world. And so the other thing that gives me hope that like things will get better is that everybody in the world can see the problem. Like, so I've been working with Jonathan Haidt, who's got this book, The Anxious Generation. It's a very popular book. It was discussed in my kid's school. Some of the parents at the school, they're like, he has a bunch of graphs in it. They're like, I don't need to see these graphs. I can see it all around me. Governor of New York said the very same thing. She goes to schools. I agree with the graphs too, but like, it's honestly just very obvious to people that we're all living with these products that are getting us to do things that we don't want to do, right? And so I do think that like, maybe the Philippines is part of any one jurisdiction. I do some work in the state of Minnesota. I don't think the state of Minnesota by itself is going to change things, but I think all of us working together, the problems are the same everywhere. Like we're all using these products more than we want. We're all seeing things that we don't want to on these systems. We're all more public than we want to be. We want to have more privacy. We all have the same problems. I think the status quo can't stand. Like there are enough angry parents out there. There are enough angry people out there that like something is going to change eventually. So, and I think the tech companies see that, right? Like I think they know that like they need to come up with a better solution long term. So I'm not willing to say that they're never going to change, to be honest. Are they going to change overnight? Maybe not, but I think, the status quo can't stand, and eventually something will change. And so it's just up to us to like make sure that change happens sooner and happens better, and not to let them off by like putting the onus on us, but the onus I think should be on them.
I agree. I guess my question is, how do you get them to do that accountability process and that change process faster when you know that it hurts their bottom line?
Yeah, I mean, I think, once upon a time, cars were mass produced, I think, in like 1908. And we didn't have seatbelts till like 1960 or something. And we get like airbags till like pretty recently, right? So car companies still make money, but they have standards, right? We drive around in cars, they're not going to blow up, we know some things about cars that they're safer. Ralph Nader did a bunch of work. I wasn't alive at the time, but I'm told he did a bunch of work to make cars safer. Same thing for food. Like I'm not saying our food system is perfect, but people like created systems to make food safer. They went to meat packing plants and they wrote books about and so you just need minimum standards I don't think people at tech companies honestly want to compete like in the way that they're competing. Like I don't think they want to be optimizing short form video feeds for video completion rate for kids, right? I think that anyone in the world thinks that's a terrible idea. But they have to do it because there are no minimum standards. So I actually think we'd be doing them a favor by creating minimum standards so they don't have, just the way we kind of did car companies a favor by creating like an expectation that your car will not blow up. And we did food companies a favor by creating an expectation that you can eat stuff and you probably won't, eat something terrible, right? Like these minimum standards actually are better for industry in the long term. We just have to get there the same way we did for minimum standards for cars and minimum standards for food.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ravi. So, Ariza, Ravi talks about this process that will not be immediate, right? It will take a bit of time before we get there. But meanwhile, as we are heading there, I know you've also been thinking about some alternative approaches that youth can be involved, especially because, like Ravi also mentioned, a lot of the people in these platforms are young people. So, can you share a bit more about that that work you're doing?
Sure. I just want to park a question. Obviously, the US is still a world leader in many aspects. And I think if the US does lead in holding these tech companies, most of which are based in the US, accountable, it'll set a very good pattern for the rest of the world. But I think I'm not speaking just by myself by saying this, but I'm not quite optimistic knowing who's in charge, right? So, you can answer that later. But yeah, how is it going to look like in the next 4 years, maybe? Do you think progress will be made or not? Okay, so maybe on to more optimistic things. I'm a big advocate of youth being part of everything, especially policy and governance. In the work that we do, the reason why we're not just doing education work or training work is because we want young people to really be effective change makers themselves. But a big problem is that they don't often get funding. I mean, I've been doing this kind of work since I was a teenager, and it's very difficult. It has been very difficult. It still is difficult for me to get funding. And that's one problem that we'd like to solve. And hopefully, for those of you who may be working in funding mechanisms, hopefully there will be more opportunities for young people to get flexible and responsive funding. I say flexible because sometimes youth organizations, they're not registered. They don't know how to do their taxes. They do have some maybe small monitoring and evaluation and auditing, accounting measures in place, but they're not as bureaucratically, I guess, developed as other bigger NGOs. So it would be great if they could get flexible funding at their level. And I would also say responsive because youth issues are different per country, per context, and even per community. In the work that we've been doing, giving seed grants to young peace builders, we're quite surprised that when we ask them, okay, what do you think is the one solution that will help bring peace to your specific community? It's never one answer. Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's a livelihood, sometimes it's even teaching people how to vote or how to think about how to vote. So it's really a diverse set of solutions. And I think at the end of all that, at the heart of that, is really actively including young people. And I think I'm seeing more of that in the world now, where youth are becoming like a quota in events and among policy discussions and things like this. But we do need to see more of it because half of the population of the world is under 30, if I'm not mistaken, but only less than 10% of the population of policymakers and leaders in the world are composed of young people. So that's something to think about. And I would also want to just briefly emphasize that in the work that we've been doing, sometimes looking at disinformation, hate speech, the online solutions are not always the answer, as young people have devised. So for instance, in one community that we've worked with, there was a lot of tensions between different religious and cultural communities. And they saw a lot of it online, but they didn't want to present the same solution online. What they did was they actually devised storybooks created for young people by young people, and these storybooks talked about these issues like how do people of different religions get together? Is it possible for a man to accept another person who's not who's say from the LGBT community? Is it possible for people from different indigenous tribes to be friends? So very basic questions like this, and they tried to answer it through storybooks. And eventually, these storybooks that we funded using a seed grant were distributed by the local Ministry of Education to other schools in the area. So it was a solution to an online thing that they sort of found an answer to offline.
Ravi, over to you. Do you think there is space for youth to engage in some of the processes that you envision between governments and tech companies?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the, to answer that and answer your question, I don't think it's a partisan issue that people want to spend less time on their phones and our phones are doing the opposite, right? And it's not a partisan issue that, kids are spending more time on their phones than on homework, right? Or that the average age of pornography exposure for kids is like age 12, right? And that's an old stat. It might even be lower. And 20, a lot of them are seeing unwanted. It's not like kids looking for it. A lot of it's unwanted and unexpected. So these are not partisan issues. And I think a lot of times, kids are aware they're being manipulated by these products. Kids want more control. A lot of the policy conversations are really about protecting kids first. I think that will have knock-on effects for our political system as well. I think you see a lot of really harmful messages aimed at young men in the world about, every boy goes through a phase where they're like, how do I talk to women? How do I find people to date? And if you ask those questions online, you can get some very harmful answers that really sort of lead you down a rabbit hole that is, the manosphere that people talk about. So I think we just need to. I think that centering youth is in some ways it's important. It's where a lot of the conversation is. I think it's a way that we can start to understand. It's one thing. Sometimes people relate like social media like tobacco. I don't know if I go that far, but I kind of think of it more like junk food or candy. And like you can offer me candy, and I will take it or not, and I might like not appreciate it if you offer it to me too much. My health will suffer, but it's fine. If you offer my kids candy, I think that's like actually kind of manipulative, right? Like if those are for parents, like we don't let our kids order whatever they want at a store because it's not, they are developing their inhibition systems, right? They are still, that is why they are children. So, I think we just need to have different rules, and we need to involve and the kids know it too. Like they will often do things to, sort of stop themselves. They're aware that they're not sleeping as much. And so I think involving kids is actually a really important part of this. And I also think it's the answer to how we make progress in the near term is that, we sort of figure out how to make these products healthier for youth. And that will eventually have effects on all of us because, they are our future.
Great, thanks so much. And I want to turn over to the audience to see if there are any questions opening up. Yes, one hand here. I know there's a floating mic. Okay, wait, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 3 hands up. Just keep your hands up so that the mic can come to you. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, then we'll take 3 questions first, and then we'll come back to the lady in yellow here. So yeah, so just keep your hand up. Julie, pass the mic here, and 1 mic there. Yeah, here 1 mic and then 1 mic. So maybe you can start and then you and then Emily.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to our excellent resource speakers. Just wanted to share a few things I've read online recently. We saw the launching of a robotic humanoid, right, who apparently will be our future housekeepers or waiters in a restaurant, and who knows what else they could do for us. We also read recently the news about a teen who committed suicide because of having a relationship with a character chatbot. I also saw someone who has a relationship with an AI hologram. So these are the things how these designs have been evolving quite fast, and very interesting how new emerging designs are being developed these days, and even with our social media platforms. So I guess my question to us is, have we been fast enough or innovative enough to respond to how technologies also evolve? Have we been pushing frontiers quite fast enough or innovative enough or creative enough to catch up on the evolving forms of technology? Should we invite them to our space here to build peace so that they can listen to us from the ground up? That's my first question, comment about this. Second is, you've talked about accountability issues and also about the lack of legislation in the US, where most of these big techs are developing these social media platforms and are being used in other countries. I read a report from PACT. I don't know if there's someone from PACT in the room, who said that hate is the business model in some of these designs. And hate is being monetized at the expense of social cohesion and democracy. And what I've noticed is that the lack of legislation in the US or in other countries where most of these designs are being done, it gives burden to other countries because we don't know exactly what to do or how to manage or regulate the social media platforms. Most of the country governments I've seen resort to automatic censorship of the social media platforms. And that's again at the expense of democracy and social cohesion. So, thank you.
Thank you, both of you, Arita. Particularly thanks for sharing so boldly and eloquently and with challenge and in an inspiring way as well. Ravi, I wanted to share, well, with both of you, a couple more challenges to your optimism in terms of the ability to respond to the challenges that we all see. One is the fragmentation of regulatory landscapes across the world. So deglobalization and the great difficulty in regulating across borders and across different legislatures. And another is the rise of little tech, which in many ways could and should be empowering to local communities, but also presents a challenge to regulation and to safety standards. Thank you.
So I had a question for both, if I may. So first for Ravi, I wanted to ask your opinion about a critique that's very pervasive in academia about values in design. It's not necessarily a critique that I endorse, but since it's so pervasive, I wanted to hear your opinion about it, which is a critique against technological determinism. So it's essentially the belief that if we just design things better, most things are going to improve. And that might also dismiss the role of culture or human behavior and a number of other things that might not always be predictable within an online environment. And my other question was in the sense of digital sovereignty, including in content moderation. I was just very curious about what you would suggest if you could propose a local form of platform governance. What are the sort of local values that you would sort of push platforms to adopt in the case of the Philippines?
Okay, well, so there is a fragmented world where legislative, there's a lot of laws in different countries, but all of us who experience technology. So I recently read like all the laws in various U.S. states, as well as like in countries, many countries, and really there aren't 1,000 things that people think are wrong with these platforms. I think you could group them into 3 categories when we looked at them. People are using these products more than they want to. They're seeing things that they think are harmful on these platforms, and they're getting contacted in ways that they don't want to be contacted. They're not. And when you start to look at the laws in various jurisdictions, and really the EU is like the place where a lot of this stuff, that legislation is the most advanced, because there's such commonality, I do think that it won't be as fragmented as we think. One reason I'm here in part is because I agree that like the U.S. may not be the leader, at least at the federal level, but there are a lot of U.S. state laws that we're working on now. They mirror a lot of this stuff. I also work with the Digital Services Act people in the EU and Ofcom in the UK, and we're all coming to very similar observations about what's wrong and about similar ideas about the solutions. And I'm hopeful that here there are people who may be able to bring some of these ideas to whatever jurisdictions that you have influence in as well, because we're all experiencing very similar problems. Yes, many jurisdictions, especially globally, do come to like this moderation. Let's jail the users who are engaging in incitement. I think the design approach is a far less abusable approach. I think it actually is also a more effective approach because it addresses all the kinds of content that will never be outlawable. And so I'm hopeful that like a design-based system would actually mitigate some of those potential abuses. And I do think that we're not going to design a way out of everything, but I think it's not a 1 or a 0. It's not a black and white case. We can definitely do better than we are now. And the goal isn't necessarily for our values to say okay, this is the kinds of things people should say. These are things people shouldn't say. The goal is really to get these things to be tools for all of us. So whatever you're trying to do, a lot of us have a desire. We don't want to be consuming junk food, right? We actually want healthier information diets. We actually want to be spending more time outside with our kids rather than on our phone with them staring at the back of our phone, right? We all want, how can we get our technology to be a tool for us to achieve these things as opposed to something that leads to profit for a small group of people. And I think that's an achievable feature. It's a common enough aspiration across jurisdictions that it's even if some jurisdictions are going to be further behind than others, there's enough that people who that the message resonates with that something will happen.
So I think those are all very tough questions. But forgive me if I kind of put them together and sort of try to answer from my experience and my perspective. I think that one of the biggest losses we have at the moment is that we just don't have enough good leadership on a global scale. There's not somebody out there who kind of stands as a figure and tells us, these are the values we want, and this is the kind of future we want. There's a vacuum of inspiring moral leadership that is going to point us towards a direction of a society that's more equal, more fair, more just. So there's really no one like that out there. I mean, you may have examples maybe from the past. I've been talking to some people who mentioned Jacinda Ardern. For all his flaws, even Barack Obama was seen as that figure of optimism and hope. But we have that vacuum. So what do we do about it? My role is to keep investing in young people and to hopefully this early on instill them in them the values and opportunities that can help them evolve into that kind of hopefully better generation of leaders. And our hope is that they will start as early as now in trying to be those leaders in their communities and hopefully grow to become bigger leaders in the government or in the multilateral space later on. So there's that. But I think another component is more active citizenry. So there are still many, many contexts where we see the role of citizenship as just voting. I think that's true for the Philippines, wherein what you think of citizenship is going to the voting precinct every 4 or 3 years to vote. But that's really not it. In fact, a lot of the discourse after Trump was elected was quite interesting because it was pointing towards the fact that, hey, people, your job is not done. Don't sleep on it. You have to keep moving. You have to keep protesting. And there was an argument even that now is the time to be as noisy and be as active as you can in trying to get the world that you want. So for me, that is inspiring because in spite of everything that has happened, there's this call for more active citizenry. And maybe part of that citizenry for me is also a critique of people like us, people who work in these very enlightened, jobs like peace building and mediation, people who feel like we're better than other people. Sometimes we do discard and exclude other voices, especially those we don't agree with. Sometimes we downplay opinions that are not close to us because, like you mentioned, it's human nature, right? And I think one of the failures of leadership in the world, those who have been those who have lost elections, people like Kamala Harris, was that in some ways, I think the people who ran their campaigns did not want to stoop down to the kind of marketing tactics that were engineered by people like Trump. But the truth is that people are entertained by shock value. People do like these kinds of bombastic messages and, in your face activities and stunts, it really does influence us. So can we try to even get these examples, these tools from people not like us, people like Trump, people like Netanyahu, people like Putin? What have they done effectively? And how can we somehow use it to our advantage? So I know this is quite a contentious space, but I would still want to do it because I think it's also very important to know our enemy better than we know ourselves. So that's that. And then maybe lastly for me, it's the question of values. So I've talked about leadership, I talked about citizenry, I talked about us, but what about the values that bind us together? That's why I talk about education a lot. It's because education, not just in school, but also in our homes, in the way we talk to people, the conversations we have, events like this, the books that we read, the movies that we watch, those create the sum total of who we are as humanity. And I think at the moment, fear and hatred are the narratives that are working best. So how do we, in all of our spaces, whether it's through civil society work, whether it's as journalists, academics, filmmakers, people who make those Netflix series, vloggers, etc., how do all of we try to create and promote better values that bring us to the kind of future that we want?
Great, thank you so much. I can't continue, I'm sorry. We have two minutes left. And I want to shut it down so that it's the end of the day. And just as we close, just 1 minute each, one takeaway that you can give them, because there are quite a lot of things that were covered, but just something that you're passionate about, you just want to leave with them.
Okay. So I didn't go into the peace building and even the NGO space by design. I feel like I'm an outsider. I came from a science high school here in the Philippines. I have an engineering degree from the University of the Philippines. I was never involved in NGO work before going into my organization. And the big reason why I'm in this space is because of my family. My mom's Muslim and my dad's Catholic, and they both come from areas of the Philippines that have seen conflict in Mindanao. And honestly, the experience for me has been quite uncomfortable. I've always had to do things that I didn't know how to do. I've always had to listen to people who presented new knowledge or were completely different from what I expected them to be. But I think the discomfort is also what helped me succeed, or at least try to succeed in what I'm currently doing. And I think we're lacking some of that. We're lacking the commitment to be more uncomfortable. It's so easy for us these days because we can choose what to watch, we can choose what to read, we can choose the friends we talk to, we can even choose where to live. Like, you want to live in a more democratic community, you want to live in a more Republican vibe kind of community, there's that. So I think it's happening all over the world, but we do have to be breaking more and more of these barriers to listen better, to develop better compassion, and to think more critically.
So, in the spirit of making people somewhat uncomfortable, I'm going to challenge the identity potentially of some people in the room who think that, who sort of define their job as fighting misinformation and hate speech. I just like to consider the idea that it sets that a lot of that if you actually were to discuss the specific examples, like we all in our minds have this idea of what is misinformation and what is hate speech. But if you actually were to discuss it, we used to do this in Met all the time. We could look at 100 examples of hate speech and we never agreed. Like, we actually have something different in our minds. There's this platonic ideal of hate speech that nobody actually talks like that. People actually talk in much more sort of nuanced ways. And so it's actually going to be really hard for us to fight these problems when we don't really agree with what the thing is, or and it's also, what is the example we're setting for governments when we sort of are deciding, this is good content, this is bad content, and then a government comes in, it's like, well, if you can decide what is good content, what's bad content, I'm going to do the same thing. So I just would love to just introduce the idea. I don't want to leave you don't do it. The idea is let's fight in a different way. Let's design these platforms so that better speech does better than worse speech, right? That in the same way that I will be penalized in life if I lie to you guys, he will stop inviting me to things. Maybe there are things that we can do as to design these platforms in similar ways. Continue the fight against bad things online, but let's not anchor on moderation. Let's lean into design.
Thanks so much, Ravi. Thanks so much, Ariza. And round of applause to both of them. Thank you. Awesome.